name is Claire Keefe-Fox, and I am very pleased to be at Nanmeebooks because I think Nanmee are the greatest publishers. Actually happened. I just happened to add a few characters to make it perhaps more interesting for the reader. And it's very nice to be talking to you today because writers very rarely get an opportunity to talk with their readers. So please feel that I am talking to you personally today. And I'm often asked why I write historical novels about Thailand, the history of Thailand. And it all started with my first book, which I wrote in French, and that was called Le Ministre des Moussons, and it is the story of Constantine Falcon. And it is set in the time of King Narai the Great. And I started it because I happened to stumble upon the story, and I thought it was extremely interesting, very unusual story, and I had never heard anything about it, and as far as I knew, in France, nobody had ever heard anything about it at all. So I thought it was a story that was worth telling, and I thought it was going to be, at first, a very short article for a professional journal, because I was an interpreter at the time, and I was interpreter for the President of France, and Constantine Falcon was the interpreter for the King of Siam. So I thought it would be a fun story for a professional journal. But then I got more and more involved in the story, and I realized that it could not be a very short article, and it turned into a very long book. And as I was researching that book, I read more books about the history of Siam. And then I went more deeply into the story of King Taksin. And King Taksin, I had heard about him, of course, like anybody would who ever comes to Thailand. But what I had not really realized was that he lived more or less at the same time as Emperor Napoleon of France, and that their lives, their history, were rather parallel. They were born in rather modest circumstances, were generals in the army, rose to power and great power at the time of a crisis situation in their country, became all-powerful, and then their downfall was very sudden. So I thought that was also very interesting, so I wanted to tell that story. And then, once again, and I was living in Thailand at the time. I was the director of the Alliance Française, Samacom Français, for Thailand. And I learned more and more about the part that France had played in the history of Siam. And it's not a very glorious part they played. And I was researching it. And then I became very passionate about it. And I had great difficulty writing it in French. For some reason, I just could not write it in French. Although my publisher was a French publisher, I had readers in France, but I was just blocked. And a friend took me to see a fortune teller here in Thailand, and she said to me, "Why don't you write your book in English?" And I said, "How do you know I don't write in English?" Because I didn't think she knew who I was. I was just somebody who come to see the fortune teller. And she said, "I don't know. Things come to me, and I say you should write your book in English." So I did. And instead of being blocked, it all came pouring out, and it was the more I wrote, the more I researched, the more fascinating and troubling the story became, although the story of colonialism is something which, of course, is condemned now, but you cannot apply the rules one lives by now to the rules one lived by over a century ago. Things were different, morality, ethics were different, but nonetheless I thought, given all this, France had still not played a very glorious role, and I wanted to talk about it. And I realized that writing it in English, I felt liberated because I was able to be as anti-French as I wanted, not using the French language. And then there was the story, my fourth book, was a story that had long been interested in, and I wanted to write it, and I did not know how to write it. It is the story of the Revolution of 1932, and I think that what was most, it brought it home to me, if you like, it's because the participants to the revolution of 1932 actually started their political movement in France, in Paris. And France at the time, although it was a colonial empire, was also a great center for political thinking, and many revolutionaries who then went off to lead revolutions in their country met in Paris. And so that it was very interesting to see that aspect, but I was having great difficulty writing the story. I knew the story, but somehow I could not make it come to life. I think there was something, because I am not Thai, I cannot put myself in the place of a Thai person. With a different cultural background, I couldn't think like a Thai person, and to write the book I would have had to think like a Thai person. So I decided to tell the story, but actually have a character who also appears in Siamese Tears, who is actually the author of Siamese Tears, try to write that story and to tell it not badly, but not as well as he would have liked to. And then I wanted to tell the story because everything that happened since the Revolution of 1932 was quite extraordinary, to the point when, at the outbreak of World War II, Siam, which had become Thailand at that point, was not really occupied and not really collaborating with the Japanese. It was a difficult balancing act. And I wanted to tell that story because it is quite remarkable that in the same country you could have had a prime minister who was associated with the Japanese and a regent who was actually an agent of the American OSS. And I thought that only in Thailand could you have something like that. So I wanted to tell the story of that whole period throughout Asia, because what was happening in Thailand was not isolated at all. The whole world was at war. And I wanted to tell the story of the whole Asian arc, going from China to Malaysia and Burma. It was Burma at the time, Myanmar now, and India. And where the war was breaking out, and to tell the story of ordinary people. You have history. History is what you read about in history books, but it is always made up of individual lives. You see all of these people who all live through history in their own different way. And I thought I wanted to tell this story of what was happening there with one person who remained in Bangkok, and the other person who, because of the war, was just traveling throughout, had to go from China to Burma, to India, and then back to England. And just want to say that everything was connected in the war. As in wars, everything is connected, and you cannot take a single country in isolation. And I also want to tell the story of the very brave people who were in Thailand, who were still continuing to believe in their country as it should be, and the very brave people. They were students who were in the United States and who were in England and who came and risked their lives, and some of them were killed, to try and prepare for the Thailand that would exist after World War II. And I'm often asked which my favorite book is. I think it's always the last book you write is your favorite, because you believe in it very much. But I think it will be very difficult for me to like a book, to enjoy writing a book as much as I enjoyed writing the last one, Bangkok in Times of Love and War. Possibly because it is a period I did not live through, but my parents lived through that period. And also it was so much easier getting the information, because when you write a book that is set in 1680 and you write a book that is set in 1939, the access to information is completely different. And everything that I needed to find out, I could find out online, whereas it's not very easy to find information about the rule of King Narayana the Great on internet. Anyway, I very much hope you will enjoy reading these books. They are in a way my love letters to Thailand, because, and I hope that the love I have for the country is perceptible throughout the book. And thank you for reading.